Japanese Prime Minister apologizes to LGBTQ plus activists over former aide's bigoted remarks. Japan's Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, apologized for discriminatory remarks made by his former aide during a meeting with LGBTQ plus groups. In January, backlash over remarks by Arai brought fresh attention to Japan's lack of legislation on civil rights protections for the LGBTQ plus community and policies on same-sex marriage. Just a day after, Kishida announced he had dismissed Arai for his anti-LGBTQ plus comments, which the former aide later apologized for. Kishida also met with activists from LGBTQ plus organizations in Japan on February 17th and offered an apology for anti-LGBTQ plus remarks made by former government aide Masayoshi Arai. Kishida said Arai's remarks were deemed unjust discrimination and were extremely inappropriate. After the meeting, Gon Matsunaka, head of the Pride House Tokyo, told reporters that Kishida said he hoped to take step-by-step approach to LGBTQ rights and fighting discrimination. Japan Alliance for LGBT Legislation Executive Director Yuichi Kamiya said he expected a move toward equal rights to drastically accelerate. He has also appointed Masako Mori, a former justice minister, as his special aide in charge of promoting understanding for LGBTQ plus people in Japan. Japan remains the only G7 nation that hasn't legally recognized same-sex marriage or enacted an anti-discrimination law to protect LGBTQ plus people. And I haven't shared this before on the table, but the bulk of my pro bono practice when I was back in private practice was on same-sex marriage. And LGBTQ rights. And my former law firm, Morrison Forster, has an office in Tokyo, and the former head of that office, Jim Hoff, who was my mentor, worked exclusively on this issue in his pro bono practice. And there's a great organization there called Lawyers for LGBT Allies Network, and they're working with the Chamber of Commerce of Japan to galvanize the business community as well as civil society to actually get numbers on surveys and such to advocate on behalf of these couples. And it seems like the appetite is not there on the government side, but when it comes to the community, when it comes to the business community, the case is there and their support is there. And so hopefully these comments by the Prime Minister signal a switch or potentially, and the fact that there's an appointed special commission, we might see some movement there. And I want to say hello to the board members of an organization that I'm a part of. It's a regional LGBT network of lawyers who are working on this issue. It's called Somos Familias, We Are Family. And we work on litigation for same-sex marriage and on the legislative side as well. And I had the fortune as a fresh summer associate to work on a draft of a litigation brief that we filed against the state of Mexico. We sued them before the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights on same-sex marriage protections. And we have had some traction in Chile, in Mexico, and these practices, we're sharing them with other countries. The founder of this organization is Evan Wolfson, who we are no stranger to him, founder of Freedom to Marry, done great work here in the United States, and we share best practices. We share what works, and there's movement in Japan. Just recently, Dan Levinson, who's a partner in Singapore office, had a webinar on advancements on Japan. These things take time, but we're hoping that with this community of lawyers and organizations, we can move forward.
Francia, I'm curious, with the interconnection of your mentorship and the firm that you were doing pro bono work for, help us understand why Japan is slow. What's going on in Japan? It goes on in the Far East and Asia generally anyway, but Japan is different.
I'm no expert in Asia, the Asia region. I'm much more knowledgeable in Latin America, but I find that Japanese society is very conservative. Right? We have this extreme work ethic. We have this extreme in many different ways. And when it comes to social issues such as this one, there's this respectability politics that plays in. You're not allowed to really speak your mind in public. It's a very conservative society. And I think that ties into why there is pushback and there's a little bit of hesitancy to have this. The Prime Minister recently said that same-sex marriage policies must be scrutinized and looked at very closely. And there's in general that atmosphere of before we do anything, it has to be very cautious, very, very gradual, and that probably plays into
the reason I ask you that, you may not be aware, from a tourism eye, Tokyo is in Asia, is the most pro-supporting LGBT tourism destination in all of Asia. Tokyo's Convention and Visitors Bureau and the tourism arm there is the most pro of trying to attract international LGBT traffic to Japan. So there's this disconnect of the tourism community and the tourism business community and what is going on across the board in the country.
Yeah, myself, I included, I had no idea that it wasn't supported until hearing this story. And because I had the idea of tourism and that it seemed like a country that was so welcoming to LGBTQ tourists and visitors, that I assumed wrongly that we had protections there. But it's a good reminder of those protections are not everywhere and they're easily taken away.
Do you think it's a case of they'll just take the tourist dollar, but
knowing what Tokyo does, it doesn't feel self-serving. They are embracing in so many ways, going farther than they would need to be self-serving. So I generally don't think that that's what the issue is.
And to your point, you just kind of assume that Japan was. I think we might be grading on a regional curve. Like Tokyo is, of course, the front face of Japan, but Japan is more open than, say, what's coming out of Beijing. Exactly. What's coming out of Beijing. What's coming out of Indonesia, Burma. So I think that we're sort of might be judging, like, compared to its neighbors, it's doing really well.
That's a really terrific point. One other thing that I think is interesting here in relation to the news of the Prime Minister's action of sacking the minister, he reminds me, now I'm sitting outside the Asia-Japan fishbowl. I'm just looking into the fishbowl. But he reminds me of, in a way, Barack Obama in 2008. Barack Obama in 2008 was not homophobic by any stretch, but he also was not embracing gay marriage by any stretch. And he's starting an evolution that took Joe Biden to be much stronger on the subject, to say, behind the scenes, I imagine in my head, or perhaps fantasize in my head, of grabbing him by the collar and shaking him a bit, and he comes along. And then he walks, then he jogs, then he runs, then he sprints, and the White House is lit up in rainbow in 2015. I get the sense, feel that that's what we're beginning to watch from the Prime Minister in Japan, of coming into a broader thought. So in general, I think this Prime Minister is Barack Obama in 2008.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Lara are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.